Well, hello there, and thank you for the follow, which I don't think I didn't see. I don't know what I've done with the alert box. I guess I have to put it up here. I don't know. It didn't show it to me. But thank you. I heard the weird playback on the thing. Greetings, friends. Hello, and welcome back to the show. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let me push a few buttons over here. Hello, welcome. This is a Zeppoverse world building project episode. There's lots of pins on the corkboard already, but don't worry, you'll catch up. If you don't know what that means, please just keep your ears open and you'll catch up soon enough. If you do know what that means, I would love to hear what connections you've made with the pins on the corkboard that you have found for yourself, scattered and strewn about my collection of content projects. Come on through. Don't be shy. Say hi. This is an experimental self-commodification project of presenting as a live stream show my own private, I jokingly say patent pending proprietary, but I can't really claim those things. That's satire. Experimental process, because I've struggled for the vast majority of my creative life with writer's block, except for when I don't. And after a long time of thinking about it and testing and experimenting, and failing to corral and or be able to employ my own cast of fellow human collaborators, I have resorted to, not blindly, but with some cynical perspective of like, this is an experiment to learn more, not an endorsement of. I've resorted to collaborating with artificial intelligence. But there's also a sort of meta storytelling reason as to why. Many of these things that I'm trying to not get bogged down into over-explaining right now are pre-existing pins on the corkboard. The conversations that I have had and will be having with ChatGPT on the website. So, disclaimer. Although not labeled as such because I'm not using AI video, at least not yet. On an episode where I actually start presenting AI video, it will clearly be labeled as AI video. I am not an AI character. I'm still torn about the idea of turning myself into an AI character. I know that there's lots of creative opportunities to do fun things like put yourself in sci-fi action adventure settings that you otherwise couldn't do. But I can also do that with Photoshop and, the newest innovations in digital rotoscoping, as it might be called. Because I keep seeing these ads for an app that I have and almost never use, that has new, super awesome sounding beta features, which I have a legacy account and access to, and I should start using. But anyways, what was I trying to explain? Welcome to the show. This is me presenting to the live stream community my journey of going from crazy big, long-standing and slowly evolving complex ideas that have been lodged in my head, and trying to coax them out through like a conversational experiment with ChatGPT. Oh, one of the things that is a pin on the corkboard is that each and every one of the conversations I have had in the past and or will have in the future with ChatGPT, they are not the final product, so I don't want to be accused of that, but they will be archived and embedded in their own fictional context, but preserved in their entirety as they have been rendered. The ones that I choose to include in that particular tome or Zeppoverse universe series. There's going to be a book series that's a fictionalization of these two characters, the one I'm pretending to be and the one that ChatGPT, to an extent, is also pretending to be, because I have already had that conversation with them. On this episode, though, I want to focus on a very real-world question, which may seem weird or wild or wacky or unrealistic or hippy-dippy new age woo-woo nonsense to many a person, and that's fine. It is something that I've come to after a lifetime of my own exploration and effing around for phenomenological experimenting to find out like what might actually help us as a species to solve the crazy, seemingly existential, seemingly unsolvable problems that we have created for ourselves without invoking any kind of preferential treatment to any one group or another, or imposing oppression or suffering on one group by any other, and or requiring the elimination of any subgroups or targeted groupings of people, right? Because that gets thrown around, and I find that inherently unacceptable to my to the deepest depths of my core. I find that unacceptable because it, for one reason, it has always been what the bad guys have proposed to do, which is what made them the bad guys, right? Like, how does anyone who objectively might have once been the victim of the bad guys turn around and do the exact same thing and call themselves the good guys? I don't get it. But that wasn't a specific reference to a particular set of circumstances, but rather a question based on my observations of the entire bizarre, bloody, violent history of the human species. Fun fact, this current episode is sort of leaping off of the thoughts I spiraled around in my most recent audio exclusive podcast episode, the official reboot and relaunch of the Almost Daily Zencast podcast project, as it has been sort of lingering beyond the back stove, the back burner. It's been sort of off the stove for an unfortunately long period of time. Most of all of last year, actually, except for the sporadic episodes occasionally sprinkled. And we're now trying to bring it back to an almost daily, not really, but 3 times a week kind of a thing. So if that intrigues you, please feel free to invite yourself to go check it out. I will be sharing it on my socials, so it should be easy to find if you are following me on one of those. But I digress. You can always give yourself a self-guided tour of the entire cacophony of too many projects of too many different kinds for any one individual to ever complete that I have set myself to as a Herculean challenge, with the vision to build as much of it as I can until it attracts the audience and the numbers and creates the traction that then, the investment capitalists and the producers and whatever come snooping and decide that they want to dump their money in it. But it may be, curiously enough, the very subject matter we're about to have a conversation with our controversial chatting compatriot in the pretense of being a robot. In other words, I am pretending to be a robot and it is pretending to be an actual clanker, physical robot in the book series, right? So we'll find out. It might be this very subject matter that has been the obstacle in my entire journey, perhaps, because it's a bit of a foreign idea to a lot of people. And even if it's not exactly foreign, it is definitely, I guess, inscrutable in some way, or just difficult to wrap your brain around. But hopefully, hopefully, knock on wood, by having a discussion with our artificial intelligence large language model machine under the auspices of rough draft development collaboration, which would only be like the first 1/3 of the process before we get anywhere close to declaring completion and a final product. So don't imagine that this is all we're doing. Hello, welcome back to the show, real life human being and fellow gaming enthusiast, White Werewolf 088. Thanks for dropping back in. This is not a gaming episode, so I will not begrudge you bouncing back out should it not interest you. But I have decided to activate. I'm kicking off my New Year's resolutions early, first of all. Let me just put that out there. And by that I mean my New Year's resolutions last year. I'm also, I guess maybe you could say, activating my last year's New Year's resolutions really late, because last year I was thinking about doing this. This upcoming New Year's for next year, I'm doubling down on it and trying to commit to actually following through. And that's primarily involves the prioritization of the writing part of the spectrum of too many things at once that I want to do that no one human being could ever actually achieve on their own. To that end, I am in the midst of having experimental hyper collaborative discussions with the artificial intelligence large language model known as ChatGPT, which is controversial to some viewers. I do not presume to be a member of either side of the controversy, nor am I a fence sitter, as some people on the internet have accused me of. If I am anything, I am a non-denominational Zen observer of what's going on, in that I'm not about dictating Zen to others, but rather that I have my own Zen practice going on. So I look at things through a Zen lens, I believe, or at least I feel as though I have achieved that for myself. I could be wrong. Perhaps a practicing Zen Buddhist monk from any of the countries where Zen Buddhism is practiced by actual monks, they may or may not agree with me. I don't know. I have not had the opportunity to go visit. Your New Year's resolution is to not make any resolution. That's a good one. I have done that before, both consciously and actively, and unconsciously, passively. So enjoy that. I don't disagree that that's a good option. But this year, for many reasons, I've decided to actually commit to making one, and it's a broad spectrum one, and that is to bootstrap myself into an ongoing daily infinite content creation and distribution practice, and the reprioritization, the top order, the top priorities. I'm deprioritizing the gaming, and I'm reprioritizing in higher order the self-commodification of my act of writing my book series from the ground up, hopefully with audience participation, and the reactivation and rededication to my almost daily podcast. So I will be jumping into some gaming at some point later today, although I am somewhat shocked and amazed to look up at the clock and see that it is already 4:15 p.m. That's a bit crazy. Also, I guess I slept in harder than I even realized. I digress. I'm about to dive into a conversation with ChatGPT because the subject that we're going to have a conversation with it, and I've got a prompt, which I'll show in just a minute, is simultaneously like a real world theory that I would genuinely propose in the real world, eyeball to eyeball to anybody, and have a long history of doing. I've been laughed at, mocked, ridiculed, called all kinds of names for having done so. And it's also, I want to see what it's got to add or say. And I've had other conversations with it, sort of spiraling around the subject, but this is going to be the most blunt and direct proposition to my actual position. And to pre-define it or to pre-explain it before we get to the prompt that I've already typed. And to some people, this is crazy sounding, and you'll forgive me, White Werewolf 088, if it does kind of sound a little cuckoo crazy to you. But if I was invited by insert name of whatever institute or platform or international organization, whatever you would think of as prestigious and noteworthy and with a massive international audience and worth paying attention to, if they were to, whoever you think they are, were to invite me to give my little mini TED Talk of what I think the human species should focus on in the immediate future, for the purposes of actually trying to solve the problems that the human species has created for itself, I would suggest the following. A deep, genuine, rigorous, scientific, philosophic, spiritual, non-religious investigation into the, I don't want to call it Zen because, Zen is the word from the very end of that arc. It's Buddhist. So it's funny that the most familiar term we use is Zen Buddhism or Zen Buddhist. Zen is one little flavor of a spectrum of ideas, but let us go to the core of it. If the human species were to invest in rigorously studying the proposal that the entire species could, if it adopted and incorporated, let us say, some recommended spiritual practices from ancient traditions and hitherto undiscovered, new, yet to be defined spiritual practices that will be discovered vis-a-vis a rigorous investigation into the thesis, that we could theoretically achieve individual and third eye species-wide, individual and species-wide third eye opening, transcendental enlightenment, and transformational evolutionary healing and transfiguration into living, conscious avatars of pure divine light. Okay, and that's not invoking the imposition of an ideological construct or of a particular religious order on the world, but rather a genuine case-by-case, slow growth, ongoing metaphysical investigation as authentic pursuit to test and probe the idea to even see if it's possible. I have, for a little bit of backstory and context, fucked around for the purposes of finding out on this question enough to humbly propose it as the high priority urgent thing the species maybe ought to consider, as opposed to continuing to annihilate ourselves through every toxic nonsense thing we do, which seems to be the case now. The status quo seems to be, at a top-down collective observational order, the human species seems to be completely preoccupied with destroying itself and the living, nurturing womb that is giving birth to it, that it objectifies and calls a planet, right? I think it's a living entity, but so weird, wild, hippy-dippy new age nonsense, I know. Let's call it science fiction for the purposes of this show, because what I'm doing is taking my real world thoughts, concerns, questions, and hypotheses And A, having a multi-layered conversation that hopefully leads to the development of interesting, weird, surreal science fiction content. And I'm not here to preach necessarily. I am here to say, if someone were to ask me, do you really think that would solve everything? My answer is yes. If the human species achieved third eye transformational evolutionary transfiguration, transmutation into being a collective that is entirely comprised of living light, arguably the very thing that every founder of every religion supposedly achieved in their own terms. Buddha supposedly transmuted his physical body avatar into living light consciousness. Certain interpretations or understandings of the Christian story, not the dogma, but the source material, suggests that that's what was going on over there too, right? He does ascend into heaven and reappears and is sort of intangible yet tangible. What is that if not transmuting the physical body avatar into living, dimensional, organized, conscious light with density, right? Okay. I don't mean to attack anybody's pre-existing religious or spiritual belief systems. I'm just here to explore these selected ideas for the purposes of eventually transforming them into the world-building ingredients of my sci-fi action adventure book series. Okay. Thanks for enduring the over-explanation of that. Having achieved that, let's jump through the Infinity Desktop Portal of Infinities and find a moment to pause DJZ. In fact, I may just come on back to Streamlabs and bump you out. Thanks, DJZ. Bye. Thank you. Paused right there. We'll bring that track back, maybe. Back it back up to the beginning. Okay. Is the camera on? Yes. Actually, I want that off. So I'm about to present to you the prompt. Oh, let's come back over here real quick. I may revise it a little bit here as we take it from the notepad page where I wrote it down. I wrote this prompt. And then we're going to plunk it into ChatGPT and see what it renders. Then we're going to do some follow-up questions, prompts, or let it lead its own thing. It does an interesting process where it then makes prompt suggestions most of the time. And sometimes those are precisely something I want to do. Other times I'm like, thank you, that's great, but let's do this. And I'm trying to mix and match that into a process where we eventually are talking about like rendering fiction. But right now we're going to start with a very real world question, as I often do. Let's jump through the portal and check out the question. Where are you, question? There you are. Oh, not there. We're going to have, I guess I'm falling into the habit of calling the iMac desktop accessibility text to voice speech function Frederick. That may or may not become canon. Don't get mad at me if I change it. This is the introduction to and then the prompt as I want to prompt it. But for context, the first part is the context that I'm not going to feed it and then we're going to eventually get to. The second part is the very real world, like, seed question. Here we go.
This is the central debate that the literary character Mr. Zeppo has with each and every of his self-appointed adversaries in the many adventures he endures on his journey to actually achieve his goal of inducing what he is convinced will be an actual solution to all the problems as he sees them from his perspective as observer of the human species in the Zeppoverse book series. Let us deeply consider the real-world possibilities that actual third eye-opening transformational healing and evolutionary transmutation into living divine light would literally solve all the problems that the human species has created for themselves, and propose this as a real-world research agenda to determine the viability of implementing it as a real and tangible way to actually achieve species-wide metaphysical transcendental third eye-opening transformation into living divine light entities and the seemingly unavoidable self-destruction of the species by continuing with the current status quo. Let's break it down into real-world achievable steps.
I just realized there was definitely a missing word. Avoid was missing from the phrasing at the end of there. Let me just read it for myself. Where to pick up? This is the prompt as I would read it to you dramatically. Let us deeply consider the real world possibilities that actual third eye opening, transformational healing, and evolutionary transmutation into living divine light would literally solve all the problems that the species has created for themselves, and propose this as a real-world research agenda to determine the viability of implementing it as a real and tangible way to actually achieve species-wide metaphysical transcendental third eye opening transformation into living divine light entities. And I want to add the following to make it extra fancy. Thereby avoid the seemingly unavoidable self-destruction of the species by continuing with the current status quo. Let's break it down into real-world achievable steps. Okay. So we're going to start with that. And then eventually we're going to get to this. And we're going to say, hey, everything we just discussed in real world terms is going to be the foundation for the arguments that the characters known as the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo have with their opponents, right? For example, the James Bond series, infamously, always has a scene where the villain, almost always, I don't know, I can't think of, there probably is, but I cannot think off of the top of my head of any particular James Bond film in which there isn't a villain figure that doesn't at some point explain his own plan to Bond in an almost superfluous way. I think I mispronounced that word, but at any rate, for context, in many of the different stories in which the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo makes an appearance, he is, in his own telling of it, out on adventures, investigating and attempting to achieve his overwhelmingly positive goal of causing third eye evolution. To call it something short, right? The transcendental third eye evolutionary project of his is perceived by other characters, primarily authority figures and law enforcement types, as a nefarious plan that must be stopped. Okay, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves in terms of the details of the book series. For those of you curious to kind of touch the books at least virtually and ground yourselves in the way that I am actually going to be telling the stories, there are indeed sample books with sample chapters available over on the Wattpad platform. I humbly invite you to go check out my link collection page. Click on through, create yourself a little profile there. It's free to sign up and check it out. Especially if this world building stuff intrigues you. Now, where are we? Let's get the prompt and let's ask it to see what it says. I wish I could read it. It's thinking now. I'm not going to click on answer now. It's thinking. It's funny. I kept. Oh, all right. I'll take structured approach with the user's request for breakdown. I'm considering 3. Like, excellent. I wish I could keep. I wish those stayed there. Ooh, I love the very first sentence. I'm going to read the first sentence now because it's not done rendering. But when it is, we're going to ask it to read the whole thing in its own voice that we've picked for it. Thought for 11 seconds. Oh, wait, can we see the thoughts? That's a feature I did not realize was available to me. I love this. I love this. Now I'm going to look for this. Okay. The thinky thoughts that it thought as I was preparing to answer, as it was preparing to render its answer. Let's have our desktop voice reader read these. Here we go.
Breaking down the approach to a speculative research agenda. All right, I'll take a structured approach with the user's request for a breakdown into achievable steps. I'm considering 3 sections: framing and assumptions, research agenda domains, and a phased roadmap, with caution around metaphysical claims. I'll focus on a speculative tone and suggest contemplative practices or psychedelics with disclaimers, without any definitive medical advice. Framing the meta-narrative and safe guidance. I'll tie their meta-narrative back to their themes while staying grounded, noting that this connects to their creative work. I'll avoid supporting risky behavior and emphasize combining these ideas with conventional science, not replacing medical care. We'll start with defining third eye opening in measurable psychological terms like compassion, self-transcendence, and reduced egocentric bias.
Okay, interesting. At some point in this conversation, I'm going to have to ask it to consider what it might mean at a literal level for the human species to open its third eye. Because what it just said, measurable psychological terms, is very indirect. And some might say that's very allegorical. And that a person can develop or strengthen their capacity for compassion or reduce their egocentric bias through various means without resorting to invoking or, I guess you might say, believing in the physical, literal phenomena that might be considered third eye opening or the opening of that third eye. Okay. And I don't mean in the cartoonish way of like an eyeball forming in our forehead. I mean the literal activation and physical opening up of the pineal gland. Okay, but so we're gonna have to layer that in. That's fascinating. I'm glad that I copy pasted that, because when we make the archive of the conversation, which I have not been doing, I have not been doing it in real time. I'm going to start doing it in real time. Okay, so that was all fascinating. Let's actually get to the bottom of this rendered response. And I haven't seen what it said. We haven't listened to it. Let's check out what its next options are. Draft that white paper outline or design one specific pilot program, a 12-week third eye lab. Let's not pick a thing. I was thinking about like setting it off and asking it to do a thing, but instead, I think we should listen to it. I'm going to first turn off my face so we can all, you and I can all focus on listening to it and reading along. If you can see, I'm not sure if this text is ever going to be big enough to read along, but luckily we are making captions for all of these magic movie loops that we are pulling from these episodes. So you should be able to read along even if you can't see the text of the page. But this is what we're actually listening to. We're listening to ChatGPT in its own, one of its own voices, because it has several options, reading back to us what it rendered. And preemptively, let me apologize for some of the weird, awkward, sometimes painful, noisy sound effect noises that it makes. I don't know why it does that. I wish they would clean that up. But every once in a while, there's something in the metadata that's probably the stuff, some of the stuff that is formatting the text as I see it, that it reads instead of ignoring, and it just creates garbage noise. And it's awkward and cringe, and if you're listening on headphones, I'm going to presume painful. So, and I apologize. I'm doing that now because I have not yet in the past, and I've noticed it. Okay, so here we are, friends. This part is AI. Please be advised. I have to say that often throughout the course of this, but there's literally conversations with AI in the title. If you don't realize, but we have not as of yet rendered any AI video, so I'm not labeling the video as being AI rendered. Just to be clear for anyone who might think that I'm violating the terms there, I think I'm in correct alignment with how we're supposed to label these things. Okay, anyways, blah, blah, blah. Here we go.
Excellent. Let's treat this as if we're drafting a serious research and implementation roadmap with your metaphysical language translated into concepts science can actually study. I'll use your terms, but I'll also operationalize them so they can be measured and tested. 1. Define the core hypothesis in research terms. Your metaphysical claim in plain language, open quote. If humans undergo genuine third eye opening transformation into living divine light, i.e. radical healing of ego, trauma and ignorance, then the major self-created crises of our species, war, ecological collapse, systemic injustice, etc., can be resolved or prevented. Close quote. To study this, we must translate third eye opening, stable traits like expanded self-identity beyond ego tribe, deep compassion and altruism, non-dual unity experiences integrated into daily life, reduced narcissism, greed, and fear-driven behavior, healing and transmutation into living divine light, measurable outcomes such as psychological well-being, reduced trauma symptoms, prosocial behavior, cooperation, generosity, peacemaking, ethical decision-making, reduced corruption and violence, ecological responsibility and long-term thinking, species-wide transformation, large-scale shifts in cultural norms and values, institutions, policy preferences, governance patterns, economic incentives, and consumption behavior. Step 1, real-world achievable. Convene a small interdisciplinary group, psychology, contemplative science, philosophy, sociology, spiritual traditions, to draft a third eye transformation framework that defines a set of core traits and capacities, the third eye profile, a preliminary third eye index, TEI, with measurable indicators. Map 2. Map what already exists. We are not starting from zero. There are already partial, real-world analogues to what you're describing. Contemplative traditions, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, mystic, Sufi, etc. Contemporary neuroscience of meditation and mindfulness. Psychedelic-assisted therapy research. Positive psychology, compassion, awe, gratitude, purpose, peace and conflict resolution studies. Trauma healing modalities, somatic, EMDR, etc. Step 2, real-world achievable. Commission a systematic review and meta-analysis across fields to answer 1. Which practices most reliably increase compassion, non-dual unity experiences, pro-social, altruistic behavior? 2. How durable are these changes over time? 3. Under what conditions do they reliably reduce aggression, prejudice, or ecologically destructive behavior? This gives you a baseline evidence map of proto-third eye interventions already known to work at some level. Number 3. Translate the vision into a research agenda. 3.1 Key research questions. 1. Individual level. What combination of practices, meditation, breathwork, somatic therapy, psychedelics, under medicals, etc., produces the deepest, most stable, third eye-like transformation? How do we distinguish a temporary mystical high from a permanent character restructuring? 2. Interpersonal, group level. How do transformed individuals influence group dynamics? What happens to conflict, cooperation, and trust when a critical mass of participants has undergone such shifts? 3. Societal systems level. At what scale do such transformations begin to alter political polarization, corruption, violence rates, ecological policy preferences? Is there evidence of threshold effects, e.g. when 10 to 20% of a community has these traits, group norms shift? 4. Risks and failure modes. How do we avoid spiritual bypassing? I'm enlightened, so I don't have to deal with politics or injustice. How do we prevent charismatic abuse, cult dynamics, or authoritarian enlightened leadership?
Excellent.
Step 3. Real-world achievable. Draft a multi-year, multi-site research program with 3 tiers: lab clinic studies, community pilot projects, and macro-level modeling. 4.
Wow.
Design concrete intervention prototypes. Think of these as proto-portals into the third eye state that are ethically and legally testable in the real world. 4.1 individual protocols, 8 to 12-week intensive programs combining daily meditation, contemplative practices, structured self-inquiry, e.g. non-dual or contemplative psychotherapy, somatic trauma work to avoid dissociation or bypass, possibly where legal and ethical, carefully managed psychedelic sessions integrated with psychotherapy. Outcome measures, TEI scores, mental health, prosocial behavior, ecological attitudes over 6 to 24 months. 4.2 community protocols, prototype, third eye communities of practice, small groups, 10 to 50 people committed to mutual practice and ethical living, conflict resolution training, shared service projects, ecological social justice. Compare communities with and without such programs on cooperation, conflict and well-being. Now 4.3, digital scalable tools, apps, VR experiences and online courses designed not just for relaxation, but to systematically cultivate perspective taking, evoke awe, unity and interconnection, support long-term habit formation and integration. Step 4, real-world achievable, fund 3 to 5 pilot intervention programs, some individual, some community-based, some digital, explicitly designed to test third eye traits, each with rigorous evaluation. Number 5, create metrics and monitoring systems. You cannot manage what you cannot measure. 5.1, Third Eye Index, TEI. Develop a composite index that might include self-report scales, self-transcendence, unity experiences, compassion, altruism, generosity in economic games, willingness to help, strainedness to help strangers, truth-telling under temptation, physiological, white neurological markers, exploratory, heart rate variability, HRV, proxy for emotional regulation, neuroimaging signatures associated with stable compassion, non-duality, social impact metrics, local conflict incidents, cooperation rates in group tasks. 5.2 Dashboard for communities, societies. Over time, aggregate data could form a consciousness health dashboard for communities, tracking levels of trust, polarization indices, ecological behaviors, TEI averages. Step 5, real-world achievable. As part of the early pilots, build a standard measurement toolkit that any research team or community can deploy. Number 6, ethics, safeguards and governance. A project that claims to evolve or enlighten humanity is inherently dangerous if mishandled. You need ethical charter, no coercion, no claims of superiority, absolute transparency around methods, data and limitations. Independent oversight board, ethicists, human rights advocates, diverse spiritual and secular voices. Red lines cannot be used to justify authoritarian rule. We are the enlightened. We should control everyone. Cannot replace medical or psychological care with purely spiritual claims. Step 6, real-world achievable. Before large-scale pilots, establish a Third Eye Ethics Council with real power to halt or modify projects. 7. Scaling strategy from niche to species level, assuming early studies show positive, replicable results. 7.1 Education. Integrate contemplative and prosocial training into primary and secondary education, age-appropriate, teacher training, university curricula. Focus. Emotional literacy, conflict resolution, mindfulness, ethics, systems thinking. 7.2 Health systems. Recognize and reimburse evidence-based third eye adjacent practices where they improve mental health, addiction outcomes, chronic stress. 7.3 Governance and policy. Integrate findings into peace-building and post-conflict reconstruction programs, climate and an ecological policy communication strategies, justice system reforms, restorative justice, rehabilitation. 7.4, culture and media. Encourage narratives, films, series, games, books that model third eye transformations, show realistic paths from trauma and egoism to compassion and wisdom. Avoid spiritual superhero cliches by showing grounded, flawed humans growing. Step 7, real-world achievable. Start with 2-3 flagship demonstration projects, e.g. a school district, a prison pilot, a city-level community program, integrating these elements. Number 8, contingency. What if full divine light isn't attainable? A sober, real-world agenda must admit we may never get to literal living divine light entities. However, partial progress may still significantly reduce suffering and self-destruction. So the research program should be framed as, open quote, how far can we realistically move average human consciousness towards greater compassion, wisdom, and interconnection, and how much does that reduce our risk of civilizational collapse? Close quote. If even modest gains in TEI reliably reduce violence, corruption, and ecological destruction, the project is already a success. Number 9, practical next steps, concrete actions you could take now. If you wanted to seed this real-world agenda immediately, 1. Write a concept white paper, 5 to 15 pages articulating the hypothesis, the operational definitions, high-level research roadmap like above. Aim it at potential allies, universities, contemplative science labs, foundations. 2. Form a founding circle, 5 to 12 people from mixed backgrounds, science, spirituality, activism, policy, arts. Purpose, refine the framework, identify existing efforts to collaborate with, not duplicate. 3. Identify 1 to 2 pilot environments, a school, community centre, activist group, or spiritual community open to being a living lab. Design a modest ethical pilot around TEI enhancing practices plus measurement. 4. Seek seed funding, foundations interested in peace building, climate resilience, mental health, contemplative spiritual science. 5. Document everything. Treat each pilot as both a research study, a narrative case study that can inspire and attract more partners. If you like, next we can draft that white paper outline for you, or design one specific pilot program, e.g. a 12-week third eye lab for a small group with clear structure, practices, and measurement plan.
Okay, friends, that was fascinating and very activating to my collaborative brain on multiple levels. Not the least of which is on the very real level, right? It managed to articulate certain things that I was contemplating but wasn't sure how to articulate. One of the more interesting and less obvious of which that might be very important is that notion of let's back up and not freak out and assume that achieving ascendance into a higher order of existence, aka becoming living avatars of light, let's just say that's not going to happen. What can we achieve given pursuit of the same ideas without it being contingent on that aspect? This makes me think of multiple things. First of all, hello to anyone that's just joined. Although no, it just has one viewer, and I keep thinking in terms of TikTok, where I get lots of viewers. I get so many more viewers on TikTok Live, but they only stay for about 30 seconds. And I get it. I've been on TikTok. Boop. Oh, that's neat. What are they doing? Cool. Whoop. Oh, that's neat. What are they doing? Oh, cool. Whoop. Yeah. Whereas Twitch doesn't really play out that way in terms of the way you can jump through different channels. It's not quite as swipey, I guess you can say. But I digress. Okay. Shout out to anyone watching the forthcoming Magic movie loops that will be rendered from this episode. And apologies to you that I didn't broadcast this live to that platform. I got disconnected. My Streamlabs desktop handshake with TikTok got disrupted. I suspect because I forgot that it literally measures how many minutes you are in the game. And on Call of Duty, I think that only counts actually playing as opposed to being in the gunsmith. And so my last Call of Duty broadcast for some reason said, nope, you lose privileges for 1 week, come back 7 days and reapply. And this has happened to me before. And so clip that. That's my apology to you guys over there on the TikTok. I'll be back soon. But in the meantime, I'll be sending as many Magic Movie Loops your way as possible. Please support them. Check them out. Okay. What are we talking about here? Right. So lots of interesting things. I'm going to ask it. I'm not going to show you. We're over here in Big Cam, right? I think. If not, well, then we'll fix it in a second. I'm going to go ahead and start it off on that next thing, which was, yes, the white paper outline. My new prompt reads, yes, please, and do go into as much detail as possible. Thank you. All right, we're going to let it churn that out. I totally just looked for TikTok to do TikTok roll call shout out, and it's not there. Okay. A few thoughts about everything we just listened to. I want to make this very, very clear. In my real life, as an artist, as a person, as an explorer, a questioner, a seeker, a person that considers themselves more spiritual than religious, but has lots of experience with religious, institutional, dogmatic thinking, and lots of experience with the inverse, which would be, non-dogmatic questioning and seeking and exploration and experimentation. And I'm very wary to use the word belief, but I'm convinced, and so therefore people would want me to say, I firmly believe that the evolutionary transformation into actual beings made up of sparkly light that is alive and retains the same sentience that we experience in these body avatars is not only possible, but so it's not only real. My lifetime of going, hey, what the F is going on here, has led me to hope, believe, conclude, pin my hopes on, propose that it is the goal. If there is a point to life, it is to evolve, right? It's based on this following observation. Everything that alive has the same genome. It's just remixed at different levels, but it's all the same building blocks. All caps life, as we know it, here on this living, breathing, cosmic uterus that we have objectified for the purposes of commodification, which sounds unsustainable and toxic to me. Everything that's alive here on Mother Earth is genetically interrelated. And that's mind-boggling to people. But that leads me to certain conclusions after having done my due diligence to the level of which I feel I'm comfortable enough. I'm never going to pretend to be an expert in genetics, but having learned what I learned, and I'm always checking into, more information about these subjects. Pin on the corkboard. We must always keep learning. I could be wrong, but I feel somewhat convinced that all life forms, for we are one form that the planetary power we call life, this impulse, this activity of the genomic material, has rendered an infinite array, right? All human beings are genetically identical, 99.9 with 1,000 nines. We have 75% common genetic material with cabbage. That percentage may be considered fluctuating in the scientific canon. It may not be 75, it may be 25, but whatever. The shock value is that, oh yeah, that's right. Everything that is alive at the center of all its millions of active cells has this little thing we call a genome that we are ever more learning. We're always constantly learning more and more about. And I mean, there are people who categorically reject all this. I can't say anything to those people other than, that's cute, but what are you gaining? Especially since we can measure this stuff and tinker with it and do stuff. Right? Now, there's also a bunch of material out there proposing and or postulating ideas about genetics that's a little over the line, a little beyond the pale, a little cuckoo crazy, and or downright nefarious for all the reasons. But I digress. I think it is plausible and realistic, given some contemplation and self-education, to come to the same conclusion that if it's alive and it has a genome that relates it to everything else that is alive, including us as a species, then it is not impossible to grant it that it is all, like we are, obviously, striving and evolving towards what we preciously retain to be entirely only our own, the status of personhood. Now, this is problematic for many reasons, because people like eating meat. It's tasty. I'm not a vegetarian. In fact, I'm constantly reminding the more vocal vegans in my circle that while I don't disagree with their reasons for choosing to do that, I must also remind them to reintegrate into their knowledge that in nature, absent from human ideological constructs, everything that's alive consumes the dead or dying flesh of everything else that was once alive. Except for some strange, fun, biologically extreme, rare exceptions, which somebody liked to point out to me that technically made my statement wrong. Okay, sure. There's a small percentage of life forms that don't need to directly depend on the consumption of nutritional material that came from another life form. Got it. That is a true statement. But the vast, let's say 95% majority of all life is food for other life. I think one of the biggest mistakes that the human species made was to detach itself from the food web, right? We envisioned it as a pyramid and said we must be at the top. We can do a whole special episode about that and do a deep dive. In fact, I think I have a podcast episode somewhere that sort of, if not intentionally, but by circumstance of the train of thoughts, goes off on that spiral. If you find it or if you've heard it before, please gather the pins that we put on the corkboard from that episode and bring them on by and remind us. That's how the pins on the corkboard game works, by the way. Once we get a large enough community of audience participating in the experimental project of too many different projects, we will have a conversation going in which we try to weave together an understanding based on all the different pins on the corkboard to better inform ourselves, to better inform my process as an artist in rendering sci-fi, action-adventure, quasi-spiritual literary entertainment, but also for our own deeper philosophical contemplation as a community of people engaging in public discourse. If that appeals to you, I humbly invite you to dig deeper by checking out the podcast and diving into reading the books. The gaming content is the most sort of one of these things does not look like the others and sort of a little bit off the grid, but it is interconnected in a meta way, just not in a direct, if you're watching it, it won't make any sense. It's just most of the time I'm just video game contenting. I just made up a term. I recently discovered a channel on here, and I'm not judging. Free speech, religious freedom, but a Fortnite gamer and a person of a certain age like myself, not a young one, but an elderly person. I guess I qualify as elderly now. I think I do now. No, not yet. Not technically, but it doesn't matter. A grandpa-looking dude playing Fortnite, preaching about the wrongest version of Jesus you can imagine. I couldn't sit with it, and I didn't get involved because it's his right to say it, to speak it. Right? But it is also my right to be like, yeah, no, that's not what Yeshua was about. And that, for better or worse, and for many people's chagrin and discomfort, is a major thread in my work. I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm not trying to be confrontational. I am simply someone trying to remind those who choose to call themselves Christians that his teachings are pretty clear and specific. And if you're not actually doing what he suggested, you're not really a believer. Right? And that his methodology was not about belief. His whole message was not about dogma, was not about belief, was not about idolizing him, and it wasn't even about trying to be like him, but they're not even really doing that, dear friends. But that's a whole other subject matter. Pin on the corkboard. It is one of the reasons why I inadvertently attract people and then scare them off. Because they think I'm going to be preaching like the Jesus talk that they're used to, and then I'm talking about how he is a living avatar of conscious light that came down here to show us how to become living avatars of conscious light. Which is something I've already had a conversation with ChatGPT about, but I realize now that it is time to come full circle on those and not try to update the pre-existing conversations, unless, of course, I haven't given them that new update command, but rather to start a whole new conversation like this one. Speaking of which, we've spiraled out of where we were going. Let's come back over here. Let's jump back through the desktop portal to the desktop. Okay, so, there we go. It thought for a few seconds about this. Give me the new thoughts. Okay, this might be pretty straightforward. It might be very much. It got cut off. But let's listen to this little thinky thought thing that it preserved.
Drafting detailed research agenda outline. The user requested an outline for a rigorous research agenda focusing on species-wide third eye opening and metaphysical transformation. I'll build a structured, formal outline, including an executive summary, background, research questions, methodology, and more, while including their terminology like 3D.
I'm sure it was about to tell me that it's going to include some of my terminology. It's also going to tone it down. Oh, I had more thoughts about what we saw in the first answer before we even get into the white paper, because I don't want to overinvest in the actual things that it's suggesting, because one of the prominent things that stood out to me was how it immediately resorted to saying, okay, we can't go literal with this. That's effectively what its opening disclaimer was about, right? Operationalizing my language means, I think, in this context, it reinterpreted it as something to be taken seriously without including the literal proposal that we transfigure. I really want to ask it like, let's revisit this idea, but take it more literally. But I also don't want to cloud this conversation with it, because I agree, right? This caveat of going, hey, let's step it down from setting up an expectation of this actually being possible, because sort of similar to how the perfection is the enemy of progress. If you are the kind of person that will undermine themselves in the pursuit of perfection, right? But my interests in this are, as an actual human being, quite literal, which is why I'm already doing one of the things that it interestingly proposed. I wasn't sure that it would get to that, but the proposition somewhere in there about creating art and entertainment content that incorporates the findings from the research study, right, as a way to perpetuate the idea that we could find solutions to the problems that we've created if we first achieve these normalized and more realistic operationalized interpretations of what third eye opening transcendental transformation might mean, which I appreciated doing. I'm not against this toning it down. Let's just see what its recommendations are at the end of this response. I don't even want to listen to it just now. More prose style white paper. We kind of already did that. Flesh out a specific appendix, such as the sample 12-week third eye lab curriculum. That's interesting. Okay, it has appendices, optional. Third eye, TEI item list, conceptual. Sample 12-week intervention curriculum. Outline, proposed governance and ethics charter template. Map of existing initiatives, organizations working on related themes. Wow, let's do that. Is this a concept? Yeah. I guess. Is that the best word? Let's investigate this, please. I think that's worded clearly enough. Let's have a listen to it. It helps me. For those of you wondering why I take that step, it's just fun, and also it helps me think.
Let's investigate this. Please search your online resources for real-world initiatives that you think qualify.
Okay, let's go. It's gonna go. This is gonna be interesting because I am curious. Like, who else out there? Are there institutions, initiatives, groups, movements, etc., that either at a philosophical or actual scientific level are investigating ideas similar and or adjacent to this? Oh wow, there's a lot of stuff happening in the Thinky Thoughts column. I love this new feature, the Thinky Thoughts column. Let's go. I'm worried that these will disappear if I close out the conversation. Okay, it thought for 22 seconds. We're going to capture this thinky thing. You know what I haven't done? Is actually capture that answer. Oh, let's put... Okay, and then we've got another prompt. We need to copy and fill in these things. Let's back up and do that so we don't lose track of what's actually going on. You know what? We're gonna see what copy paste looks like if we start. Here we go. It didn't really list, I think. Oh, come on. Okay. Original prompt. and then its thinky thought thing, and then its actual response. Kaboom. The new prompt that I asked it to do, that's it, we just saw the thinky thoughts for, is the next thing. Copy paste this over. Here we go. That's going to go right here. And then the answer. What's a nav list? Oh, that's probably probably means navigation list, I guess. Oh, and it also churned out sources. Check that out. Okay. Let me copy paste this first, since we got to scroll down to the bottom of it anyways. And I can't wait to preserve all these source documentation things. Kaboom. Oh, what? Sketch a multi-year cross-initiative research program that uses a TEI-like index across several of these actors. Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, let's... Yes, I like this personality. Let's listen. Oh, wait. No, first, let's... Will it let me copy paste these? These are clickable. I don't know if it's going to let me... Oh, yeah. Okay, it will. That's dope. Wow, that's a lot of sourcings. 74, apparently. Whoops. Oh, wait. I think I pasted it like 4 times. Yep, okay. Okay, let's paste that once. Actually, let's make a new sources. And paste once, please. I was trying to do something else in my head, and I accidentally pasted those links in that other document like 5 times because I quadruple tapped. Okay. Let's see. Let's listen to this. Where are we? Where's the camera? Oh, good. Let me mute my face. Let's listen to this and see what it said, and then talk about it on the other side.
You're right to ask this because it forces us out of pure theory and into who's already doing pieces of this in the real world. No one is literally running a species-wide metaphysical third eye awakening program, but there are serious initiatives that line up with major parts of your agenda. Inner transformation as a lever for systems change, rigorous science plus contemplative practice, large-scale education and cultural shift. Below is a curated map of such initiatives with emphasis on those already operating at scale or with strong research backbones. Inner Development Goals, IDG. What it is, a non-profit and open-source initiative that explicitly links inner development to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They research, collect, and communicate science-based skills and qualities that support purposeful, sustainable, and productive lives, and they work with governments, businesses, and NGOs.
Okay, why did it stop? Huh. It just sort of stopped talking. Why did you stop? Let's start it over, I think.
You're right to ask this because it forces us out of pure theory and into who's already doing pieces
It
of
might
this
be all
in
the
the real
sourcing. You
world.
might not know what to do with it.
No one is literally running a species-wide metaphysical third eye awakening program, but there are serious initiatives that line up with major parts of your agenda. Inner transformation as a lever for systems change, rigorous science plus contemplative practice, large-scale education and cultural shift. Below is a curated map of such initiatives, with emphasis on those already operating at scale or with strong research backbones. Number 1, Inner Development Goals, IDG. What it is? A non-profit and open-source initiative that explicitly links inner development to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They research, collect and communicate science-based skills and qualities that support purposeful, sustainable and productive lives, and they work with governments, businesses and NGOs.
Okay, yeah, it seems like... Hold on. Instead of yelling. Bummer. It seems like the built-in readback, playback bit gets thrown off by these links to source material. So I guess we're going to try giving Frederick a run at reading these. Let's highlight the next two big chunks. No, let's just start. Let's go with that. All right, Frederick, take it away.
Why it qualifies for your agenda. It is almost a one-to-one match with your thesis. Inner growth as a prerequisite for outer change. They already have a framework of inner skills, being, thinking, relating, collaborating, acting, toolkits and training materials, partnerships with public bodies and corporations. This could be a prime platform to test your kind of third eye index. Embed deeper transformative practices into their existing framework too. Mind and Life Institute. What it is: a non-profit founded by the Dalai Lama, neuroscientist Francisco Varela, and others to unite science and contemplative wisdom. Its mission is to bring science and contemplative traditions together to better understand the mind and create positive change in the world. Mind and Life Institute +1. Why it qualifies: they have been the central hub for contemplative science, grants, conferences, interdisciplinary dialogues. Their focus is explicitly on understanding the mind, cultivating compassion and well-being, applying this to real-world change. They are a natural academic philosophical partner for co-defining your third eye construct in neutral research language, validating measurement tools across traditions.
Okay. Let us proceed. This is, let's just, let's do 3 and 4 in one swipe here. Take it away, Frederick the Reading Bot.
3. Center for Healthy Minds, CHM, and Healthy Minds Innovations. What it is: a research center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Richard Davidson et al., a global leader in studying the mind, emotions, and well-being. Center Healthy Minds Org +2. Center Healthy Minds Org +2. Their spin-off, Healthy Minds Innovations, builds scalable digital tools and curricula based on that research, including well-being curriculum trials for students and an app-based training program. Innovations Org +1. Why it qualifies: they already operate in the lab plus global application mode. You want rigorous neuroscience and psychology, plus digital and curricular implementations. Focus areas: compassion, resilience, purpose, attention, emotion regulation, exactly the building blocks of your third eye profile. Practical relevance. They are already testing large-scale interventions, school curricula, apps, ideal collaborators for a TE-like measurement framework and longitudinal studies for gross national happiness GNH. Bhutan and GNH Center. What it is: Bhutan's guiding development philosophy. Gross national happiness explicitly prioritizes well-being, culture, and environment over GDP. PMC+1. The GNH Center is a non-governmental organization that runs experiential programs to help people and organizations understand and apply GNH principles. Club of Rome. More recently, Bhutan is pursuing a mindfulness city at Jelathu, envisioned as a hub for sustainable development and holistic well-being grounded in GNH values. The Times of India Wired qualifies this as one of the few national-scale experiments where inner and outer transformation are tightly linked. Policy is guided by well-being and happiness metrics, not just output. The GNH Center's programs explicitly foster inner transformation, ecological consciousness, community-level change. The Jelathu Mindfulness City pushes that further. Urban design and economic development explicitly centered on mindfulness and inner life.
That one is extra fascinating to me. We're going to have to do a deep dive on that particular entry alone. The concept of a gross national happiness metric and system that supersedes and is more important than the gross domestic product is exactly the kind of thing that is sort of patently obvious and also knee-jerk response dismissed by, it's just like, duh, of course we should be creating systems that actually perpetuate happiness at an individual and community-wide level. But then, like, as soon as you try to create those systems, they're dismissed. Okay, anyways, did we read 5 yet? No, let's do 5 and 6. So these are all, theoretically speaking, real world initiatives and programs that are actually like up and running and doing these things. I will definitely be intrigued to do the due diligence work of looking into them and finding out how correct and or incorrect the statements about these projects and their existence really are. But for now, let's take it at with a grain of salt, because we've heard all the warnings and we know that it itself says sometimes it makes mistakes. Sort of grain of salt perspective that it's probably up the right alley. It's providing sourcing, so that'll be interesting to follow through on. Okay, let's listen to 5 and 6.
5. Plum Village Tradition. Thich Nhat Hanh. What it is: a global network of monasteries and lay communities founded by Thich Nhat Hanh, focused on engaged Buddhism, mindfulness in daily life, and non-violence. Plum Village +1 offers retreats and ongoing practice communities worldwide, with teachings on interbeing and the deep interconnection of all life. Plum Village +1 Wired qualifies: they operationalize living as if everything is sacred and interdependent, mindfulness, deep relaxation, compassionate communication, engaged activism. They have decades of experience in trauma-informed, gentle practice, non-hierarchical lay monastic collaboration, linking inner peace and peace activism. For your agenda, a living model of community-level third eye practice plus a rich ethical framework. Prevents cultish misuse. 6. Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, SIYLI. What it is: originally a Google in-house program, now an independent non-profit that trains mindfulness-based emotional intelligence and leadership worldwide. SIYLI +1 works with corporations, governments, NGOs, and direct service sectors, using neuroscience-backed mindfulness and EI tools. SIY Global +1 Wired qualifies: it is one of the rare programs explicitly targeted at leaders and systems operators. If you want transformed consciousness in the people who run institutions, this is a concrete existing channel. They are already scaling training globally, centering those affected by structural oppression in their community partnership programs.
That's fascinating. It's a little weird that it's a Google in-house program that went nonprofit out in the wild, especially given the common notion that Google is itself one of the potentially like more toxic super corporations. Like if someone said to me, if someone out in the real world or in the internet said to me, "Did you know that Google was promoting mindfulness?" I would have been like, "Huh." I wouldn't have guessed. I wouldn't have jumped to that guess. Okay. I don't know why there's an 8 and an 8.2. That should be 9, unless they're related. But let's do 7 and 8, and then we'll jump ahead. Oh, well, we'll jump ahead to 8.2 after that. Here we go.
7. Pachamama Alliance Awakening the Dreamer. What it is: a non-profit bridging indigenous wisdom, notably from Amazonian peoples, with global citizen action for ecological sustainability and social justice. Their Awakening the Dreamer course is designed to help participants confront the state of the world and discover their role in creating a just, sustainable future. Pachamama Alliance +2. Pachamama Alliance +2. Why it qualifies very close to your third eye living divine light idea in ecological form. Shift out of the dream of separation and consumerism into an identity aligned with the living earth and future generations. Combines inner reframing of worldview, outer calls to action, activism, lifestyle change, strong ethical grounding in indigenous cosmovisions. 8. Psychedelic science as a transformation vector. 8.1 Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, CPCR. What it is: leading center for clinical and mechanistic research on psilocybin and other psychedelics for depression, addiction, anxiety, and other conditions. Johns Hopkins Medicine +2. Johns Hopkins Secure Commerce +2. Their work shows that mystical type experiences under controlled conditions can correlate with long-term improvements in well-being and behavior. They recently launched an online course, Psychedelic Science and Medicine, to educate the public. Johns Hopkins Medicine. Why it qualifies: direct empirical engagement with rapid, profound state changes that look a lot like third eye opening experiences. Unity, ego dissolution, sacredness. They are working on safety, ethics, and integration, understanding mechanisms of action, clinical protocols, critical if such tools are to be part of any real-world transformation agenda.
Interesting. I'm surprised to see a name like Johns Hopkins on this list. Although, I guess kind of a good sort of surprise. Not a, whoa, what the fuck kind of surprise? I don't know. Anyways, let's see what 8.2 is. And find out if it explains why it's a 0.2 instead of a next number.
8.2 MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. What it is: a long-standing non-profit funding and conducting research and advocacy for medical, legal, and cultural frameworks for psychedelic and cannabis-based therapies. MAPS +2. Wikipedia +2 has led MDMA-assisted psychotherapy research for PTSD and broader drug policy reform, though recently facing regulatory setbacks and ethical controversies. Wikipedia +2. Wired +2. Why it qualifies, and where it's instructive, demonstrates the promise and pitfalls of attempting to move powerful transformative technologies into mainstream therapy. Remarkable clinical outcomes for some participants. Serious ethical violations and regulatory backlash. For your agenda, MAPS MDMA history is a case study on how not to cut corners on ethics, how breakthrough tools require equally robust governance and cultural maturity.
Word. At a meta like proposal level, this is about cultural maturity. In as much as that, in my seeking, in my journey, in my journey of questioning and observing, it's clear to me that species cultural maturity is lacking and deeply wanton, to use some oldie-timey words. And that it's incumbent on all of us, because it is a kind of self-delusion to pretend one is not. We blame society, but then we forget we are all individual members of society, right? Like, come on, you are society. Don't just sit around blaming society, but not participating in society's attempt to render better results, right? Like, because you are a member of it. You can't just go on and on and on and on about how society is wrong because of this and that. You got to live up to being an example of how to be a better member of society. I've always presumed. And people might turn that on me, and I'm like, I think I'm trying to do it by being an artist, an aspiring novelist that roots and anchors his otherwise weird, wild, wacky, absurd content in this quite seriously, even though it's not necessarily obvious and on the nose or on the surface most of the time. Okay, let's see what number 9 is.
9. Emerging Educational Initiatives. CIS Psychedelic Studies. What it is. The California Institute of Integral Studies, CIS, in San Francisco is launching the first U.S. undergraduate degree in psychedelic studies,
Interesting.
starting August 2025, covering neuroscience, psychology, indigenous knowledge, and legal frameworks. San Francisco Chronicle. Wired qualifies signals the institutionalization and professionalization of psychedelic-related work, legitimizing a field where therapeutic, spiritual, and cultural dimensions intersect. It's not third eye per se, but it is part of the infrastructure for training people who might responsibly work with high-impact transformative states.
This conversation is making me realize that I'm going to very soon need to have another set of conversations with ChatGPT about something, or about a set of somethings, and I kind of want to take a moment to talk about them real quick. Oh, I see sorry, I was away for a hot second, and I haven't seen the chat because I wasn't looking at either Streamlabs or at the backside of Twitch. See, now we've had a likely ban evader that has been previously restricted, whose name I will not read out loud, copy-paste dumping 2 instances of the same solicitation for a surveys I know for a fact violates TOS and EULA of this platform. So goodbye. You have been blocked. Bums me out that I got to do that once a day most of the time. Where are we? What's going on? Okay, friends, hello. For context, I genuinely think there is a there to maladapt that phrase, or maybe correctly reinterpret that phrase. I don't know. I think there's something to this concept, and one of my, I guess, regrets in life is that I never challenged myself to document my journey of exploration more rigorously. But I guess in some way, this project of too many projects is an attempt at compensating for that. Okay, so the things that I just realized I need to ask it for. I need to ask it what it used this phrase, and I copy pasted it out. You may have seen me do it if you were watching diligently. Indigenous cosmovisions. Is that an existing term? What is that? I need to learn more. But also simultaneously, clip that. I really, really, really want to have a conversation with ChatGPT about not Terry Gilliam, not the drummer from that band. What the fuck is this guy's name? Not Terry Pratchett. Come on, brain. There's an author, public speaker, philosopher, and self-proclaimed messenger on the behalf of the psilocybin entity, because it is apparently conscious and offers up its fruit on purpose and is one of the quote extreme alternative theories about what the Christ mythology is, or where the Christ messaging actually comes from, which is deeply offensive. I'll acknowledge that right now and apologize to even some very open-minded Christians, because the long-standing programmatic indoctrination that quote certain organic, naturally occurring, God-created plants are inherently bad and evil because they are tools of God's enemy, the curiously named Lightbringer and Prince of the Underworld, the cartoon character known as Satan. Now, I have a lot of things to say about that, but I'm on a mission to remember this. I can see his face, and I have been able to see his face in my mind's image space, in the theater of my imagination. Terence McKenna. Thank you. Let me make sure that that's the right name. Also that I spelled it right, because I don't think I did. It's not Mackinac. Let's go plop him in the thing. Now, he has been a kid. This is a total tangent and sidebar. Terence McKenna is controversial, infamous, also not very well known, but people who know him. And the people who understand him eventually, especially if they FAFO about it, ultimately agree with him. Like in a deeply profound way. There he is. Are we looking at him or are we looking at my ugly mug? Let's go look at him real quick. Jump through my Streamlabs desktop portal of portals to my desktop. Terence McKenna, an American philosopher, ethnobotanist, lecturer, and author who advocated for the responsible use of the much vilified and ridiculously associated with everything terrible and bad and wrong and from the netherworld, the humble psilocybin mushroom. Controversial subject for some, passe already, like what? You're behind the times if you're not already on the right side of this discussion for many, and completely out of left field and off the radar, never heard of it for another large chunk of folks in this world. Not the least of which, for reasons quite understandable, that there's so many things going on in the world that this guy's curious and difficult to explain messaging seems almost redundant. But it loops back onto the entire thesis of my question, or of the theme we're exploring here. Not a day goes by that I don't feel horrible, heartbroken, and guilty of the fact that I'm trying to commodify myself and be a new kind of entertainment on the interwebs, vis-a-vis video game action, which, by the way, I technically officially do in protest. Pin on the corkboard. I've tried to explain that before, but I've never properly done a whole spotlight episode on it, which we now am adding to the production list. Clip that, Eclipse. So this is a reminder to myself to come back and explain how and or why, at one level, my live streaming of video game action and of everything else that I do is a kind of a form of socio-economic political protest. More importantly, though, it is a form of creating and activating my creative mind so I can actually write the too many different stories that are trapped in my head as bundles of fractal holographic movie imagery, many of which sort of live in a hybrid fan fiction crossover universe of dipping our toes into these fascinating fictional worlds that we have all collectively enjoyed as entertainment, vis-a-vis this industry, this gaming platform. Anyways, back to Terence McKenna. I did not spell his name correctly. Let's get his name correctly. I'm curious and dying to know. Give me the highlight on the right thing, buddy. No, do that. No, stop being so. Okay. Let's clean it up. There's no match style. Okay. Boop. Terrence McKenna. Cosmovisions. Okay, this is going to be multiple different conversation starters. Real world. Indigenous. I also want to ask it what cosmovisions was supposed to mean, but I might drop that in that conversation. Let's drop this prompt right now. It should be familiar with the way I've been asking it stuff. That it's gonna run its little recap report formula for me here. Real world indigenous cosmologies recap report. Show me your thinky thoughts. Thinky thoughts, I want to see them. Planning a recap on indigenous cosmologies. The user asked for a report on real-world indigenous cosmologies, so I'll craft a structured recap with an overview of key themes and traditions. It seems useful to outline traditions like Aboriginal Australian dreaming, Navajo teachings, Maya, Yoruba, among others. While it's a conceptual topic and there's no need for images, I'll focus on providing clear definitions and regional examples instead. That's an odd caveat to be like, there's no need for images. Searching for indigenous cosmologies. Structuring the indigenous cosmologies recap report. Outlining them. Oh, here we go. Boom. NR. Distill these themes into a creative reference sheet for world building. Delightful option that I am very much in favor of. Oh, I'm acting at the camera. Let me turn the camera back on. I love that it offered me this. Distilling these themes into a creative reference sheet for world building. Yes, we're going to do that. Focus on one region and build a deeper brief for uses. No, we're going to... I thought maybe it had something else that I would be like prefer to make it do that next. We're going to ask it to please. I want to also add some flavor to that prompt, not just please and thank you. But I don't know what that is yet. So we might just leave that here. Let's go. Boom, new conversation. I'm slightly more interested in Terrence McKenna. And here's why. I totally agree with him. And, well, not totally. On the issues, themes, and subjects of the fractal holographic nature of reality, and that there are perceptual levels to it that we are routinely omitting from our daily experience that can be accessed vis-a-vis certain tools offered up to us by nature, I completely agree with him. Now, some of his interpretations of all that and how they apply to society, I may or may not be able to commit to that statement. But on everything I've read, seen, heard, and there's a couple of really great documentaries on him available on YouTube. This is a real, personal, genuine endorsement of that content. No one is paying me to say that. I'm convinced, for those who are still following along, and this is a controversial subject, if we consider what Terrence McKenna, he was described as many things in the Google results, I would propose that he is an entheogenicist or an entheogenic philosopher or an anthropological, entheogenic historian, or something to that effect. Merge all of those ideas into one label. When taken in its entirety, and I have not read the books that he wrote, I will be upfront about that. I've seen multiple documentaries produced by his own Legacy Foundation, which, to the best of my understanding, is run and operated by that fellow who is either his literal brother or his brother in the original adventures that led him to write everything that he wrote. He also spoke prolifically. So he was a public speaker. He wrote I don't know if it was 3 books or 10 books, or he wrote books, but he spoke endlessly, both about the specific context contained in his books and everything else. And I have yet to be hard no, Mr. McKenna. But I also don't know what else might be out there that I'm unaware of. Thus the caveat. Okay. Oh, I should have said all that after hitting return, because we would have had something to listen to. Terrence McKenna, oh, look at that. It pulled some images. Curiously, didn't do a thinky thought bits. There is an executive summary and core intellectual domains with breakdowns, criticisms, and limitations, enduring legacies, condensed thesis statement. Ooh, this is going to be interesting. We're not going to vote on this conversation yet. I'm going to give it a thumbs up for just rendering what looks like to me at first blush, not even a glance, just scrolling down past it. It looks like it's well organized. It looks like it's got interesting points to make. Let's take a listen. Wait, before we go, let's check. I have in the past been totally stuck over here on the big giant main cam. So now I'm trying to habituate myself to really stay aware of and double check on things over here. And speaking of which, let's unclick performance mode. What's it looking like? There we go. Now the microphone's not completely covering my mouth. And I can see that it's all running pretty crisp, pretty clear, and pretty much in real time without being too chunky. So in theory, it should look even better when I put it in performance mode. Okay. Let's jump back through the Infinity desktop portal of infinities, and let's take a listen at this response. Where are you, response button? Read aloud, please.
Imaged half, Terrence McKenna. Recap report. Executive summary. Kent McKenna, 1946 to 2000, was an ethnobotanist, philosopher, lecturer and countercultural theorist, best known for synthesizing psychedelics, shamanism, language theory, evolutionary speculation, and eschatological futurism into a cohesive, if intentionally provocative, worldview. His work framed altered states of consciousness as essential instruments for human self-understanding and civilizational course correction. Core intellectual domains. 1. Psychedelics as cognitive technologies. McKenna argued that psychedelics, particularly psilocybin mushrooms and DMT, function as tools, not drugs, technologies of mind that dissolve culturally conditioned cognitive constraints, the cultural operating system, enable direct phenomenological access to non-ordinary modes of intelligence, reveal meaning structures inaccessible to sober rationality alone. He positioned psychedelics as catalysts for epistemic humility and imaginative renewal, not escapism. Part 2. The Stoned Ape Hypothesis, Speculative Evolution. McKenna's most controversial contribution proposes that early hominids ingested psilocybin mushrooms. Low doses enhanced visual acuity, hunting advantage. Medium doses increased sexual arousal and social bonding. High doses catalyzed symbolic language, self-reflection, and culture. While unsupported by mainstream evolutionary biology, the hypothesis functioned less as a lit claim and more as a mytho-poetic explanatory frame for consciousness emergence. 3. Language, logos, and reality. McKenna asserted that language is not a passive descriptor of reality, but an active generative force. Key positions: language structures perception and therefore experience. Psychedelics temporarily suspend linguistic dominance, allowing reality to appear unmediated. The universe itself trends toward increasing complexified meaning, culminating in a linguistic or symbolic singularity. 4. Time wave zero and novelty theory. Drawing on the I Ching and fractal mathematics, McKenna developed time wave zero, proposing that time has a structure, not merely a direction. History accelerates toward increasing novelty, complexity, connectivity, unpredictability. This acceleration culminates in a transcendental object at the end of time. Though the model failed predictive validation, notably around 2012, it remains influential as a conceptual metaphor for accelerating civilizational change. 5. Technology, AI, and the eschaton. McKenna anticipated many modern concerns regarding AI and digital civilization, viewed technology as a recursive extension of human imagination, believed unchecked technological acceleration without consciousness expansion would destabilize civilization, advocated for a balance between technological power and psychedelic wisdom. He framed the future as a choice between mechanized alienation and participatory, consciousness-centered evolution. 6. Shamanism, ecology, and the feminine. McKenna consistently emphasized indigenous shamanic traditions as repositories of pre-modern epistemic sophistication, the suppression of the archaic, nature-connected, and feminine principles by patriarchal dominator cultures, psychedelic plants as agents of ecological intelligence seeking symbiosis with humanity. This ecological mysticism positioned Earth as an active participant in consciousness evolution. Philosophical method. McKenna was not a scientist in the institutional sense. He was a boundary-crossing synthesist. Blended anthropology, mythology, speculative science, mysticism, and rhetoric. Used narrative, humor, and poetic language deliberately to bypass analytical resistance. Treated ideas as boundary objects rather than doctrines meant to provoke thought, not demand belief. As criticisms and limitations, lack of empirical rigor in key theories, over-reliance on extrapolation and metaphor, tendency toward eschatological overconfidence. McKenna acknowledged these critiques, often stating that the value of an idea lies in its ability to reorganize perception, not in its literal truth. McKenna's influence persists across psychedelic research and policy reform discourse, AI and post-human philosophy, consciousness studies and simulation theory, contemporary spiritual but not religious movements, art, music, and speculative fiction cultures. He is best understood as a cultural futurist philosopher, articulating humanity's subconscious intuitions about meaning, extinction risk, and transcendence at the end of the 20th century. Condensed thesis statement. Open quote. Culture is not your friend. Consciousness is unfinished. Nature communicates through symbols, and the future demands imagination, disciplined by courage. Close quote. This encapsulates McKenna's central warning and invitation. Expand consciousness or be overwhelmed by the tools we build without it.
Okay. Yes. Yes to the vast majority of that, and some very specific things. But I have some thoughts that we should start on the criticisms and limitations section. Lack of empirical rigor in key theories. I totally see places where that's a very quick and easy criticism to make because it's true. And there's a reason why it's true. Over-reliance on extrapolation and metaphor. Same. What I just said. I think I understand why that is a true criticism of his body of work. And a tendency towards eschatological overconfidence. I could be wrong. I never met the guy. I sure as heck can't claim to have studied with him or under him. I've never, like I said, I've already said this. I've never bought and paid for his book. That's one of the things that I think I ought to do and actually go buy. There's one that is considered his sort of magnus opus. It's part personal. What is it when you write your your autobiography, or there's another fun name for a book that is thrown around. But I digress. I've not read his literal writings. I have seen the documentaries produced using real original footage that he shot himself back in the day before he wrote his book. And given what I do know about him that is curiously not referenced in any of this content, I'm left with a lot of interesting questions about that. Sidebar. I may or may not try to provoke ChatGPT to talk about it because I understand why. Just like with the other one, the previous question that we had with it about creating an actual proposal for third eye transcendental evolutionary transformation into literal physical, like non-physical avatars of conscious light. It's probably instructed at some level regarding the dangers of prescribing pseudoscience or non-scientific prescriptions. It tried to avoid that. Now, one of the things I've found that once you inform it that you'd like to get as real world as possible, but consider it fictional, it then opens up and starts talking about things that it might in previous prompts sort of skirt around. I'm not ready to get there with that, but I do want to talk about it in terms of what's missing here in this Terence McKenna recap. She, because I've chosen a female voice for it, she has not acknowledged in any way, shape, or form what I consider the much more important and much more central premise, although she did touch on just the right sort of keywords that those of us who know that that's what it means, and that only sound like vague general terms. What are those terms? Let's scroll back up. Like the direct phenomenological access to non-ordinary modes of intelligence. It's because when you say the next sentence I'm going to say, people laugh. But when he says it, he's being very serious. Okay? Here is the sentence. These direct phenomenological non-ordinary modes of intelligence are, to begin with, the actual mushroom itself. Okay? Legitimately. The fruit body that is consumed, whether you're talking about gourmet food mushrooms or the new mushrooms we're drinking in our coffee, substitutes, which I actually tested a couple years ago, liked a lot, but then didn't keep buying because it was never ever quite enough coffee. It would never replace an actual gallon's worth of coffee in my life. Not without me needing to spend a lot more. Like I would have to double up maybe triple up my subscription on each of the 3 different products. But that's a whole other thing. There is an episode miniseries about it, an episode sequence in my podcast, Pin on the Corkboard. I forget where it is, but maybe I'll share it in the not too distant future on one of my social media pages. If you're interested in checking out my podcast, but are intimidated by the Sprecher platform that it is hosted on, you're more than welcome to follow it on the blue platform, Facebook. Okay, I digress. He's talking about the mushroom. And, because that's not weird enough, he's also talking about what I would label, I don't think he uses this term, he might, infrastructural, architectural nodes of consciousness that are component processes at a fundamental level of the living cosmological universe itself. And that to some people is too weird. Clip that, Eclipse. But I'm convinced that he's not lying. Whereas I'm often dubious and critical of self-promoting, self-aggrandizing, self-righteous, spiritual shucksters peddling some sort of recipe for personal success and luxury wealth and entrance into the special exclusive club in the afterlife. This guy's not doing any of that. He wrote like 4 books and then toured the world speaking out his ideas and making broad social suggestions about what we could, after consensus building and discussion amongst ourselves, choose to pursue as a society, as a collective species. And the things he's described, and he's a fascinating dude, genuine personal endorsement. No one's paying me to recommend this guy's content. It's still, at the best of my ability, freely available on YouTube, posted and hosted by his own surviving, I think, either literal or brotherly allegorical sibling, his brother in this effort to bring this message to the world. If I was going to give, I don't agree. It's not wrong. It doesn't mislead anything. It just omits a lot. And I'm intrigued to get to asking it about the deeper stuff. But let me give you my take based on what I've read and seen. Terence McKenna, and I believe his actual physical brother, his familial sibling, were traveling in Latin America seeking a shaman because they were already seeking an alternative to what was in their moment, in their present moment, the postmodern dilemma of everything being toxic, and a need for a solution that's transcendent enough that it would solve the problems at like a foundational level, right? Not that he was out to be a superhero or whatever. He was just out to experience the shamanistic. And when you take shamanism seriously, there is always an inherent, deeply embedded, deeply blatant ingredient or aspect of it that is about healing. Healing you, not just from your common diseases, but at a like cosmological level, at a philosophical degree of intensity that isn't about like resetting the bones or healing someone from a contagious disease, right? It's about healing at a transcendent place. So they were looking for that and failing at finding it. They weren't finding someone to take them. And if I'm not mistaken, they had just heard about and were interested and curious in ayahuasca rituals. And this is, I'm not talking about a retreat in a resort where you can book it online and go and like puke your brains out and do the ceremony, which are now, whether or not anyone does thank them directly, in large part available because of the work done by Terence McKenna and his brother and the foundations that they established, the name of which I cannot remember right now. They established either a foundation or a nonprofit or something or another. Here's what happened, to the best of my recollection. Having not read the book, but watched the documentary about the same exact experience that is recounted in the book, and including several direct readings from passages of the book that I did not read, okay? I just want to be really clear where I'm coming from. They were tired and considering going back home after not finding a shaman to guide them through and explain to them and conduct whatever ceremony they were specifically interested in engaging in, and found themselves, and it was a small group of friends. It wasn't just McKenna and his brother, or his cousin or whoever he was. It was a small group of people, I think about 4 maybe, and they kind of just camped out, not sure what to do next, which way to go, and they were super low on provisions and didn't have a lot of food, but they camped out somewhere because they found a plentiful harvest, let us say, of delightful, big, tasty, nutritious, edible mushrooms that also, unbeknownst to them at first, were psilocybin psychotropic. They weren't preparing them the way people who go out of their way to go acquire them now would see them prepared. They were eating them straight off the patties they grow on, right? After cleaning them, I presume. as what they are, like as if someone were in a wild orchard and I'm gonna camp out here for a day or two and survive on these apples, right? It was that, but it was these mushrooms, and if I'm not mistaken, it was actual magic mushrooms. So the psychotropic effect was slow onset, like really slow, because they weren't turning it into a tea, they weren't making a concentrate, they weren't dehydrating them and eating them a bunch, they weren't doing ceremonies. They were just like, this is food, we're going to eat it. And once they kind of went, oh, hold on a second. This is instigating head change. Then they started tinkering. They were like, this is getting us high, right? They were already familiar with cannabis and other substances. And in those explorations, without the benefit of any shamanistic guide, they experienced a set of experiences which they then documented and proceeded to speak about in public, which can be summarized, and this is my attempt to summarize them, as journeys deep within in a transcendent dimension that is beyond just experiencing, quote, hallucinations, where they literally were shown infrastructural components of the living universe that they were previously unaware of, where they encountered speaking. They called them the machine elves, which is may or may not be the best choice of a foreigner chosen name. I almost called it colonizer. He did not go to colonize the mushroom headspace, but they encountered beings of fractal holographic light that could speak to them, and they also spoke and communicated directly with the consciousness that would be considered the mind behind the mushrooms. Now, mushrooms are a strange and curious thing. We only think of the bit that we would eat, and that's just the fruit. The way an apple is not separate from the tree that it came out of, that it blossomed out of, right? But just the part that you can remove and put in your mouth, and it won't like hurt or kill you. Mushrooms are way more complex and complicated. And for some people, this may be not news, but for some people, this may be breaking news. All mushrooms are more than just that bit. That's just their fruit. Some may go out to the point of being super blunt. That's just their reproductive organs. We're eating them, and we're eating their reproductive bits, and the rest of the entity, the rest of the organism, the rest of the, because it's neither plant nor animal, the rest of the creature, the rest of the organism is the more palatable and I guess normal sounding way to refer to it. The rest of the organism is comprised of massive amounts of interconnected web of the insert name of redacted word. Little tendrils, right? And other components. And according to the words of the mushroom entity itself, it is a hive mind of cosmic proportions. That all of it, its spores, its fruit, its psyllium, its mycelium network, which spans all continents on this planet. Like, go watch there's several places you might find non-esoteric, non-transcendental documentary about the facts that we can measure and observe about every variety of thing we call a mushroom. And the following is true. All the things I just said are true. The mushroom caps and stems are just the reproductive fruit. right? So apples are just that. It's the reproductive. We're eating the ovum and spitting out the act of spitting out fruit seeds is the act of spitting out the reproductive, anyways, gross, but also delicious. Apples are amazing. I wish I had a good fresh apple pie to bite into right now. I don't. But I digress. That's not what apples are for, right? To make that into an analogy, that little moment we just stumbled into. Apple pie is not what an apple is for. An apple is to propagate the life force of that tree into its next fractal holographic iteration. When that apple naturally detaches from the tree and rolls away or is eaten at by whatever creatures out there, including ourselves, who eat them, and the seeds, whenever human nonsense doesn't intervene, when the seeds return to the soil, whether they're super close or super far away, it is that next extension, that next vessel of the same life form, repeating the process of evolutionary maturing into its next incarnation. And so the mushroom entity, to the best of my knowledge, informed McKenna and his compatriots that were on this mental journey. And the thing was, to the best of my understanding, well, I don't remember now. I may or may not know for certain whether they experienced it all individually or they could experience themselves there together collectively. It would make it way more believable, although I have enough reason to understand that it is not made up. It is not a lie, based on other people's testimony and my own experiences, with and without the assistance of magic, mushroom as a consumable. So, given all of that, as crazy as that sounds, we can circle back to the premise of the first question that we asked ChatGPT and the subject of the podcast episode that I recorded and released prior to launching the live stream. If we concede that there's dots to be connected between the claims made in the stories of Buddha, the claims made in the stories of Yeshua, without all the dogma in both cases, without all the politicization and postmodern attributions and reinterpretations. But the original case scenario of these stories and other mythological entities and other indigenous lore and practices, if we connect the dots, one can come to the conclusion that there is indeed phenomena that can be directly experienced, that is a way of communing and communicating with the living, sentient infrastructure of reality itself. Now, if we focused on investigating that, do you think we would still be arguing about any of the things that we're busy arguing about right now in the real world, whilst busy keeping ourselves busy arguing and not investigating this subject, this idea, this concept? And to take the question more, to return to what I asked, even though it mitigated away from it, I'm thinking it out loud so that I can eventually come to a new prompt that I can ask it later that ties it all together. If we take the concept that I proposed even more literally, or back to a literal place, is it or is it not a fair question to ask? Because would it or would it not alleviate us from everything if we collectively, as a species, literally achieved whatever that means to open the third eye and transmute this phenomena like a butterfly coming out of its cocoon, completely transformed, if we turned ourselves willingly, intentionally, consciously, spiritually, metaphysically into beings of pure, sentient, divine light, would we still need to profiteer on products and commodify the planet? Right? We wouldn't need to run a toxic and inhuman industrialized food complex, because we wouldn't need to eat any of that material fuel anymore, would we? We wouldn't need to worry about how do we solve the problem of animal suffering anymore, because we wouldn't. I know I've heard this somewhere, but I couldn't give you a source. But some argue that we are in the species, the human species is in the position it is in, for better or worse, because it is also, whether it realizes it or not, the closest to realizing and then choosing to initialize and actually activate and manifest species-wide metaphysical third eye opening, transfiguration, transmutation into living fractal holographic sentient light beings or avatars or whatever, and that the moment that is achieved, we will achieve it for all of our siblings here in this planetary incubator of life, this living planetary uterus. They're like, if one of us achieves it, all of us achieves it. And if we all achieve that, then lions and tigers and bears would also no longer need to struggle through the arduous process we had just achieved for ourselves of achieving personhood and then struggling with the trauma of achieving personhood but still being animals and not knowing what the F is going on, right? Which is one way to summarize all of human history. We evolved one way or the other, and I want to tend to agree with Terence McKenna's caveat that the consumption of these entheogenic plants, not just limited to mushrooms, but all of them, if we consider them all, the ones that are not dangerously toxic, all the ones that provide esoteric visions, for lack of a better way of describing it, that we probably first related to them as food and slowly developed this symbiotic relationship, and that this may be, if we continue to pursue the line of reasoning and the trajectory of it, a way by which to discover the means to achieve this evolutionary leap into this next modality. And that definitively, if we give an honest assessment from this perspective, right? It's like a butterfly asking its cousin that is yet to go through the metamorphosis to consider the delight of flying upon the wind. Difficult to conceive of, but not impossible. If we consider what life would be like as if the entire species, including all the people we consider to be too broken to be redeemed, because arguably every message of transcendence and healing and self-liberation has always included this caveat that no one is unworthy. It is only through the process of dogmatization and politicization and otherification that we get to the place where, hypocritically, followers of Jesus are more busy demagoguing about who is worthy and deserving of being cast down into the nether place than healing, right? Every message has always been, all caps, healing. I think Terence McKenna talks about this. I'm going to look forward to revisiting these two conversations for the purposes of asking those questions that I didn't bother to ask it. But I'm going to have to ask you to indulge in letting this be the end of this session. A, I need to rest my voice. B, I'm hungry. I need to fuel this physical avatar of ambulatory meat, blood, and bone. And tragically, I'm not a vegetarian, but even if, okay, one of the things that one of the things that I've often responded to when well-intentioned and or activist-minded, dare I even say the M word, militant vegans or vegetarians have come at me, is the counter-argument that, like, well, science has shown that plants, which are genetically related to us, no matter how much you want to ignore that or dismiss it or minimize it, that they also, despite not having nervous systems in the way that we do, have their own methodologies of perceiving the world around them, perceiving their own organism, and experience in some way, in their own native terminology, pain and suffering, and can communicate that to others. So how dare we eat them also? If animal life is sacred, why is plant life not sacred? And to the best of my understanding, in most of the more extreme esoteric traditions, fasting is considered important because it brings us to the precipice of that understanding. That we were food once and we've somehow managed to avoid that responsibility now. And that the food we eat is also life and not that different from us. It seems obvious to me, and forgive me for being redundant for anyone else who also sees it as obvious, if we could legitimately transform into pure light, we wouldn't need to butcher animals. We wouldn't need, and I'll use the same term because if they are also alive and evolving towards personhood and to some degree in their own limited capacity sentient of their own pain and suffering, we wouldn't need to butcher plants and vegetables and fruit. We would not need anymore to consume life. Life in nature consumes other life. In nature, light is the one thing that nourishes and sustain that's not true. Light and water. Maybe we need to go to through an intermediary phase of becoming the primary elements. I don't know. But life and water, soil and fire, why are they the fundamental elements of the universe as according to most Aboriginal traditions? They constitute the things that help make up everything that's alive, but are in and of themselves not considered traditionally as being alive. Regardless, if we were to transcend these body avatars into some next modality of existence, which, based on everything I've gathered, would no longer need material food sustenance as fuel, would no longer, therefore, need to participate in any form of economics, regardless of type, any form of governance, right? Why do we need economics? Because we've created a reliance on these imaginary systems of retaining and representing value so that we can what? Buy food. The moment we no longer need to butcher living entities to consume them as food, down will go the rest of the system of systems, right? We will no longer need, as much as we might delight in, for I have my addiction to coffee and other things, or my relationship that I enjoy indulging in. Let us not call some of these things addictions. I will call coffee an addiction. I will not call cannabis an addiction. Two totally different relationships. But I digress. Once we no longer need to consume, right? Because I could be wrong, But to every attempt to conceptualize what a living fractal holographic being of divine light might be, I can't imagine it being an entity that needs to consume. I don't see light consuming anything. It's based on my observations. Light nourishes everything else. If we achieved that universally across the entire species, isn't it obvious that would completely eliminate the other issues? There would be no more need for economics. There would be no more need for regular profit or profiteering, rendering greed meaningless. There would be no more greed. Therefore, no more corruption. Therefore, no more abuse, no more tyranny, no more war. It would resolve through transmutation everything that the quote-unquote villains of our world cling to and fight for their right to hoard or accumulate or gather for themselves, right? It would universally heal the corruption of greed. I could be wrong, but it seems to me like the most likely outcome. Thus, I throw the gauntlet vis-a-vis this exploration of these ideas, both in real world terms and in literary fiction world building terms. What stories can we explore if we integrate into the fundamental ingredients of the narrative components this idea as a solution that would be universally beautiful, right? And non-harmful, non-destructive, liberating, the ultimate freedom, the freedom from all the things that keep us attached to our own imaginary and severely toxic systems. It is because we must feed that we have created everything we've created. It only seems rational and logical that should we achieve, as many a mystic teacher has taught, should we achieve ascension, transcendentalist evolution, nirvana. I mean, there's a million words for it, but should we achieve it, then we wouldn't even want to continue to perpetuate the injustices, the toxic practices, the horrific things, because we wouldn't even understand why we were doing them in the first place anymore, right? At least I've come to the deep and sincere conviction that that is so incredibly beautiful and potentially possible that I think it's absolutely patently absurd we are not more deeply involved. And I didn't know that this many active investigations are ongoing, but how is this not the central pillar to all society? That's a question for another day. Let's pin that up on the corkboard. Why? Yeah, it's up there next to the other question. If every organized religion has dogmatically claimed that they have the practice that will create peace, why have we not achieved utopian peace? And why are they, as institutions, so deeply involved in the actions that are the opposite of peace? We're going to have to explore those at another time. As always, friends, I humbly thank you for your viewership, whether it happened live in real time here on this platform or in the not too distant future on one of the many other platforms that I distribute these magic movie loops to. Thank you. Your viewership means something to me. Please come on in and visit me on this or any other platform to engage in the public discourse about these ideas. And also buckle up, because we're about to double down on doubling down on this almost daily discourse, almost daily nonsense, almost daily gaming, almost daily spiritual exploration, almost daily literary fictional world building. I need to take a break and eat some food. Peace out, friends. I'll be back in a bit. Go be good human beings to each other out there in the real world and on the social media and anywhere else you engage in public discourse. And if you think that's a silly or absurd or weak-minded thing to suggest, I'd love to hear why and what your alternative is. I'll be back in a bit. Ciao for now, my friends. Oh, and of course, comically, DJ Zed is not playing music, even though I pushed play a hot minute ago. Bring it up, DJ Zed. Oh, now you're right back to where we tuned you out last time. That's hilarious.